Hello everybody and welcome back to another new vlog. Thank you for joining me once again. It has just recently ticked over into March, so technically we are in spring now, but it doesn't feel very spring-like at the moment. We've had a very cold weekend and one or two spots across the country have had a bit of snow. Didn't get any here sadly, but it was wet and very, very cold over the weekend. So today I've come out to see if I can take a few photos and do something a little bit different. But as I go through today's vlog, you guys might think that it may not be particularly different to anything I've done before. But I'll try and explain and show you why it is slightly different as we get through the vlog. But for now, you can see my camera set up just behind me there. That's the Canon EOS 40D. And I've set the camera up on the tripod and taken a shot of these trees in portrait orientation behind me, because I think there's a natural image that leads your eye into those trees and into the woodland, which I really, really like here. I am in a particular woodland that I've spent quite a bit of time in over the years, mainly because when I come to this particular park, I quite often enter through one particular gate, which is just 100 yards or so from this woodland. So often I'll end up walking past this woodland first, which means that I can quite often pop in here and take a few shots at the beginning or at the end of a vlog. Not always, but just every now and then I'll take something. So today I've got a bit of a plan to try and recreate some compositions that I've taken before, but this time I'm going to limit myself to what kits I'm using. I mentioned the 40D just there behind me, but on the front of there I've got a toy plastic lens, originally made by Holga and put on one of their toy plastic cameras, which has been remastered and rejigged a little bit so that it can now fit onto a Canon camera. There are some limitations with it, of course, and I'll tell you more about them as the vlog goes on. But in the meantime, why don't you give the vlog a thumbs up, and also remember to subscribe to the channel, because that really helps me going forward and I really appreciate your support. I'm going to move on now. I hope you like the image I've taken here. I'm going to move on now and see if I can find my next image. Like I said, I've got a bit of a plan, so I know what the compositions are, but it's just a case of getting to them and finding them once again. So off we go. Now there are two main challenges of using this particular lens. The first one, of course, being the fact that there is no aperture setting on the lens. Thankfully, because I've mounted it onto my Canon EOS 40D, I can actually utilise the shutter speed and ISO settings in camera anyway. So that's not too much of a problem. So combating the lack of aperture is easy enough to overcome. The second problem, of course, is there is also no focus ring on this particular lens, so I can't actually pick out a subject and manually focus on that particular subject. And I'll show you how I overcome that in just a moment. Now I'll show you my second composition in just a moment, but before I do that I want to show you the lens set up on the camera just here. What you can see in front of me obviously is the lens here, and then on the side of the lens you've got some diagrams which show different possibilities for shooting with the camera, with the lens should I say, and each of these different symbols here denotes something different with the scene. So I could possibly shoot with this one here, this one just here, which is a diagram of one person on their own. I don't know how well you can see that, it's not really going to focus properly, but it's just one person on their own, so that suggests that should be a photo of a portrait of just one person. But then as you move around the lens, next to it you've got a diagram which looks like two people together, which I would suggest that looks like it should be a portrait of two people. And then you've got here next to that a diagram that looks like multiple people, which I think that suggests it should be a photo of multiple people. But the setting that I've got it on at the moment, which I'm not sure if you can see very well, at the top of the lens, just there, there's another setting which looks like a mountain. And when I turn the dial onto that setting so that I'm pointing at that setting, it looks as though I'm taking a photo of a landscape. Now that's great because it allows me then to have some sort of focus point within the image, because that obvious landscape setting means that I've got a much narrower aperture with a larger depth of field, so it gives me something to focus on within the image. The problem of course is there is no real focus at all, so the images might still look soft focus when you look at them. However, I think I can get around that in post-production by simply sharpening the images up afterwards. Now the camera is set up just behind me, just over my shoulder, for an image just there, a really interesting composition. I don't know how well you can see it here, but there's a copse of trees behind me here. It's a copse I shot once before for a panorama that I was shooting, and I actually stood a little bit further over from here and a little bit further back and got the long lens out and photographed it front on. I've kind of come to the side of it now, and just at this corner of this copse of trees, as you go into the trees, the land that I'm standing on tends to drop away quite a bit. So as you get into the tree line itself, you're much lower down than you are when you're standing up here outside the trees. But as you go into those trees, there's a little bit of path here which drops down into the lower level of land, and it looks as though that's been slightly worn away more than anything else around it, so it looks like a very obvious path into that copse of trees and then drops down. But the interesting thing about that particular spot there is it leads the eye and draws you in to those trees that I wanted to photograph there. I'm finding, of course, that the Holga lens that I'm using isn't a very, very wide angle, probably about 60 odd millimeters on the equivalent of a full frame camera, but obviously on the EOS 40D, which is actually a crop sensor camera, it crops in even further, so my angle of view isn't very, very wide at all, which means I'm having to step back a little bit further to try and get exactly what shot I want in the composition. But that's okay because I can overcome that, I don't mind that, but at least I can work out how to capture the shot. At the moment though, I'm finding it very difficult to look through the viewfinder because I'm not really seeing very much in the viewfinder, so I'm just sort of having to set it up kind of randomly, take the shot and then check the shot afterwards and see if that works, and then if I need to recompose and move the camera slightly, then that's what I'll do. So it does mean that I'm taking a few test shots here and there just to make sure I get it right, but it seems to be working okay. That last spot that I've just photographed, a beautiful composition with those trees either side of the path running through the middle of the scene. It's actually quite a tight crop, so you just about catch the edge of the path as it runs through the scene, and the trees on the one side and kind of in the middle of the path. It's a really, really interesting spot, and it's one that I always love going back to take a photo of because it's such a beautiful place to be, and the compositions there are always absolutely beautiful because of those outstanding trees in the scene. But obviously because of that, it's also a very popular place for walkers, so I end up getting to the scene and finding that the scene is empty and I've got a perfect shot ready to take and the light's perfect and everything, and then all of a sudden I'll spend a minute and a half, 2 minutes setting up the camera, putting it onto the tripod, working out what the composition should look like, and then I look into the scene again and it's full of people, dog walkers, families with 3 or 4 kids and 2 dogs, cyclists, runners, everybody who wants to walk through the park walks through that space. But it seems that they always tend to walk through that space just as I get there, and when I get there the space is empty, and by the time I'm ready to take a shot it's full of people. Now don't get me wrong, I don't mind people. I don't mind people stopping by to say hello. I don't mind having a chat and being friendly and interacting with people. But the difficulty is I'm trying to take a photo, so I often find myself having to wait 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes even up to 10 minutes before I've got enough time to actually capture the shot when there are no people in the shot. And so that can be a little bit of a challenge on its own. But I don't really mind that too much because it's just great to be out in the woodland, to be honest with you. As I said, that's one of my favourite spots in the park to go to, but it's also a favourite spot for a lot of other people. I've come to a spot now which I think is also one of my favourite spots, but it's a spot where I don't very often see all that many people. However, just in the last couple of occasions that I have been there, there's always been a couple of people walking through as I'm there. But it's not too bad, but I like the scene. So this is the composition just behind me. I don't know how well you can see the tree further down the path here. Just somewhere in the middle of this scene, there's a tree which is kind of all bent and kind of slightly out of shape. It's one that you will have seen many times before. I've photographed it on several different occasions. It's just one tree on its own in the middle of the scene, in the middle of the path, which is surrounded by lots and lots of straight trees. And it always screams out a portrait orientation, but also the light and the colours of this particular spot are very, very different at different times of the year. I photographed this last October because I literally just wanted to come back to this spot to take this shot. But I'd also photographed this tree right in the middle, just here at the back of the scene. I'd also photographed that tree several other times at different times of the year. And I came back in October because I wanted to capture it in the autumn, because I'd never captured it in the autumn before. And I wanted to see the difference it made from when I've captured it in the spring, winter, summer. So I'm coming back here again in the spring again to capture this image with the EOS 40D camera and the Holga lens, plastic toy lens. Again, this is going to be a bit of a challenge, but I think I can get a decent portrait orientation shot out of this image as well. The main reason why I've chosen to limit myself to this lens today is because this forces me to consider the light and the composition when I'm taking a photograph. Something I should probably be considering right now, actually. Yeah, it forces me to consider the light and the composition when I'm taking the photograph. And that means that I'm always thinking about how the photograph should look, about how much light I want to bring into the photograph and how I manage to achieve that when I'm taking the photograph. Basically, this lens that I'm using, while it doesn't have a realistic aperture setting on it, the setting that I'm choosing to use, the landscape setting on the side of the lens, means that it kind of comes out at around about f11 or f16 to quite small apertures in terms of woodland photography. But what they do is they provide a larger depth of field because they're smaller apertures, but also they reduce the amount of light coming into the scene. So that makes me consider how I shoot the image, makes me think more about my own creativity. So I'm using a tripod and I'm slowing down my shutter speed to make sure I bring the light in for long enough to make sure I capture everything I need to capture. But also this lens itself is very limited in terms of the kind of quality that it produces. So I'm always trying to make sure that I get the best possible image that I can get. And then going forward in post-production, when I'm editing these images later, I've also got to think about how to ensure that I improve those even further without making them look unrealistic or hyper-realistic or anything like that. So I hope that comes across in the images. I'm moving on now to see if I can find I think probably one last image, maybe two if I'm really lucky. But I'm hoping for one last image, and I'm going to a spot that I've been to before, and some of you may recognise it once again. But like I said earlier in the vlog, I've had a plan all along about where I want to go today and what I want to photograph. And the main reason to do it is because I think these photographs are going to look quite good using this particular lens. So I'm going to move on to my next composition then. So I've come back to a spot which is very familiar to me, and I've always loved coming to this spot because I love the scene running down this hill, this path running through the woodland down the hill towards the trees at the bottom of the path. So I've obviously had to come back here and capture a shot of exactly that. And as you can see, the camera's set up just here behind me. I tried it in both portrait and landscape orientation. I can't decide which of those images I prefer, having looked at them on the back of the camera. So I'll probably show you both of those, and you let me know in the comments which of those you prefer. In the meantime, I'm going to head down this hill now, and there's another shot there at the bottom of the hill that I often take as well, which I think might look quite nice with this lens. But I've got to be very careful about my crop on the last image. So I'll show you this image in just a moment, and I'll show you where I am. So this is the spot that I wanted to come back to, the very last image. I don't know how well it looks to you at the moment, but as you can see, the path that I've just walked down comes down this hill here, and at the bottom of it I've got all these trees on the one side of the path, which are all quite straight up and make a very interesting composition. I've shot it before both in portrait and landscape orientation, and I like both versions of the shot. But I also like the way the light comes through these trees here. It's absolutely perfect. I'm hoping one day that I can probably capture some sort of sunburst effect coming through these trees one day, maybe, if I'm really lucky. I've captured it in a few places in this park before, and that always looks really effective, and I think it may be possible to do it here. I don't know whether that's going to happen today, but hopefully one day it will happen. Anyway, I'm going to set up a shot here and shoot back up towards this path and towards these trees on the one side because I love them. But before I do that, I just want to let you know, I've just had a look on the front of that lens, and it turns out that it is a 60mm equivalent, which would be a 60mm equivalent on a full frame camera. Now, using it on the Canon EOS 40D, which is a crop sensor camera, that means that it's going to be the equivalent of a 96mm focal distance. So what I'm actually shooting with these images is 96mm. I hadn't realised that until I just looked at the front of the lens a few minutes ago, so that's me being a little bit stupid again. But I'm quite happy with the images that I'm managing to capture with this lens. It does mean, of course, that I'm having to think very carefully about my composition because it's a cropped sensor with a 60mm lens. So I'm thinking about now 96mm rather than, say, 17 to 40mm that I would normally shoot with. That does make it an interesting challenge, but it's one that I think I'm standing up well to. I don't know how well it's going to work with these trees here and how far away I'm going to have to be from the trees to try and get a decent shot of this. I'll try it again in portrait and landscape orientation and see what happens. I want to thank you guys very much. The last few weeks, well, particularly in 2024, to be honest with you, my view counts and the comments that I've received from you guys has been incredible. Your support has been great over the last few weeks, and also the subscriber level has increased a lot more in 2024 than it did do at the same point in 2023. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for all of your support. It really means a lot to me. And if you've got this far into the video already and you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then please consider doing so, because that really helps the channel to grow and evolve going forward. So thank you all very much for your support so far. I really do appreciate it. If you've enjoyed today's vlog, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you on another vlog very soon. Bye for now.